Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. I apologize for the slight late start, but we had so many handouts for you, and there's this long line that was forming, and I didn't want to start until everybody was settled and on the inside, so welcome. I have to ask you a question. I feel like I just haven't had time to do this with you. How's it going? How are you receiving this? Have you learned something? Yes. Have you been inspired to have a conversation? Yes. Have you had a conversation? All right, good. I'm so glad. That's all we asked for. That was the goal. And I hope that you feel well supported, so much so that not only do you have the conversation once, but you have it in a whole bunch of different contexts with a whole bunch of different people. So this isn't just about you and your loved ones, but this is also about the people that you come into contact with. I will not be surprised to hear back from some of you who will say, gosh, my neighbor just went through this and I was able to say, hey, look, here's a resource that might be helpful to you. So that makes us ambassadors to the rest of the world. So please don't be shy about sharing what you've learned. A couple of things. You should have received 5 handouts on the way in. Do you want me to review them for you? There's a sheet that says you can limit death's financial costs. That's a big 8.5 by 14. A really important one from Gertie Delmore that says what needs to be done after a death occurs. A really important one that says contact information for workshop night. We'll talk about all of these things tonight. And then 2 more from Gertie. One says creative ideas for a celebration of one's life. And then there's a little article from the Huff Post. We ran out of those. Is there anybody who is here without, is there anybody that doesn't have one? Okay, raise your hand, because we'll count and we'll print these up for you. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll get another dozen and we'll put them out on the table. So when you leave, they will be here and ready to go. Sound good? So those are the 5 things that you need. Before you leave tonight, I want to encourage you to sort of take this last opportunity to stop at the chalkboard. And if you have not made your mark, before I die, I want to fill in the blank. Be creative, be spontaneous, be silly, be honest, but make your mark on those boards. As I said before, we're going to take a picture of all of the boards and we're going to send it to the Before I Die Global Art Project. So someday we might see this on the web and on their website, and we'll see images of the things that have become important to us. And then the resource table tonight, because of our topic tonight, is overflowing with resources that have to do with grief on the other side of the loss. So if that has been on your heart and a worry and a concern, please stop and take a look at some of the books that we recommend. It includes books that we give out fairly regularly to people, but it also includes books that you might want to pick up online and have available for your own grief and loss, in anticipation of some grief and loss, or to share with somebody you might encounter who needs a book that will support them. I think that's all for announcements, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's got devotions for us. The handheld. Buried, sorry. Buried, get it? End of life?
Yes, funny. She's getting funnier in her old age. No. I am going to read to you a devotion called Love Will Remain. Hope and faith will both come to an end when we die, but love will remain. Love is eternal. Love comes from God and returns to God. When we die, we will lose everything that life gave us except love. The love with which we live our lives is the life of God within us. It is the divine, indestructible core of our being. This love not only will remain, but will also bear fruit from generation to generation. When we approach death, let us say to those we leave behind, don't let your heart be troubled. The love of God that dwells in my heart will come to you and offer you consolation and comfort. Dear Heavenly Father, we approach you with grateful hearts for the opportunity to gather here in community, to learn about the conversations we need to have to live well to the end, and to prepare our families for the decisions they may have to form concerning our end of life and the decisions we may be compelled to make for others. Grant us your knowledge, wisdom, and discernment to love well, live well, converse well, and prepare well. Be with our presenters today, Cheryl and Carrie, that they may impart their knowledge and the knowledge we need to hear. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. I am so excited about tonight. I know that seems weird given the topic, but tonight is again a super practical night. So the first 25 minutes will be with Carrie Erickson, who's from Garrity Delmore, and she's going to talk about what to anticipate when, at the time of death, when you make the visit to the funeral home. She will also give you plenty of opportunity to ask questions. And then after she's done, I'll take another 25 minutes, and I'll talk a little bit about the funeral planning process from the perspective of what happens when you call the church, and the kinds of things that you might need to know, and the things that you can sort of begin to anticipate. I will also take questions, and you should feel free to interrupt either one of us. If you've got something on your heart that needs an answer right away, we're happy to shift gears and respond to that right away. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Erickson. What you need to know about Carrie is a member here, and Carrie knows us, St. Philip the Deacon, very, very well. So when we have a funeral and Carrie shows up, you can feel the rest of the staff at St. Philip exhale, because we know we're in good hands. So thank you, Carrie, and would you welcome her with me? There you go.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. Susan. I'm not a public speaker, so bear with me. That is definitely, this is a little bit out of my element. I do a lot better just kind of sitting and listening on a one-on-one type of a situation. So this is a little bit outside of my, okay, it's a lot outside of my comfort zone. So, and Cheryl is becoming in her older age a little delusional as well when she says that things kind of calm down. But yeah, she says I'm a member here, and I was really excited. I wanted to do this series. I just thought it was an incredible series, both of the Being Mortal, read that book, and there's some other good books out here, and I really think they're outstanding. Just a little bit of background. I know some of you out here, and some of you know me, and that's probably not a good thing for you or on whichever level, but I've been a mortician since 1985. I graduated from the U of M Mortuary Science Department, and I'm a Wayzata High School alumni as well. So, and I was working with my brother and my father at David Lee, and then as so many of us know, when we're busy making plans, then that's when life happens, and our journeys aren't exactly where we anticipated to go, but I'm now working with Dan Delmore over at Garrity Delmore in Plymouth, and I definitely love what I do. I believe it's a huge privilege to do what I do for a living. I don't look at it as a job, it's more of a lifestyle. I also feel that, is this a little echoey? Is it too loud or is it okay? Or just me? You hear me? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, so anyway, I think it's a huge privilege for funeral directors and people in our profession, even in hospice, to come into your life at the most devastating of times. I know you've been talking about it, and I think it's so great how we embrace talking about living wills and trusts and getting ready for our end of life, because I know 30 years ago when I first got out of school, it really wasn't that way. It was kind of, we plan everything else in life, we're excellent planners, but then there's this death thing over here, and that's kind of icky and scary, and we don't really want to talk about it so much. So I am incredibly inspired by how that has kind of come 180. It doesn't mean we like it anymore, but we realize that it's a part of our life, and grief is messy, and it's awful, and you kind of just got to go through it to get to the other side, from what I've experienced and seen in people. that being said, little things that I've seen that have changed when we used to go to nursing homes. I don't mean to pick on nursing homes exactly, but we'd go and we'd always say, okay, what door do you want us to come in, wherever someone died? And they said, well, just come on over then there, back there by the loading dock and come in that way. And I'm like, oh, that's lovely. Okay, fine. And, the dumpster's right there. And I'm like, okay, I hope we have more value than that. And now today, with things changing and evolving, we now go out the front door. We go out as we came in, which is amazing. Presbyterian homes, for example, and others, it's a procession of honor. You go in, they come out, they get all the people that work there and the residents, and they follow everybody out to the front door. They'll say a word of prayer, you sing a song, and they'll put a beautiful quilt on top, and it's just, I'm like, yeah, this is so much more. It's good. It's good. So that's just a couple things. So please, like I said, I don't really have, I'm a little ADD, so I kind of go all over the place. So just kind of say, Carrie, get on track here. But I know, and I heard you mention the conversation, and that is conversations about all those things. And I just wrote a couple notes down about how for funerals, how a little bit on pre-planning, how that conversation sometimes doesn't go well, how when we go to talk to someone, how we, the topic comes up and it gets kind of uncomfortable, and then we just change the subject and go on. Or sometimes we don't go there because family members may not agree, and that isn't usually a very fun thing. Other times it could be the conversation starts and someone will say, well, I just want to be cremated. And that's kind of the beginning and the end, and that's all we know. So, which can be a start. So talking about things is the hardest conversation that we can ever have, but talking about memorialization can also be one of the most important conversations that we have. It can provide the peace of mind that when the time comes, we're ready to be honored or to be honoring people the way that they would like. Like I said, we're excellent planners with everything, so it's nice to be able to plan for this. So, and if you've ever, how many of you guys have been actively involved in planning a funeral for someone? Wow, that's like a lot. You guys should be up here, not me. But it's kind of like planning a wedding. There's a lot of details, that you have to plan, and yet it's at a not as fun of a time, and the timeline is very short for the most time. So there's a lot of questions that must be answered and decisions that need to be made, and there's checklists. I did have that one handout that's got a lot on there, which I hope is pretty encompassing generally. So if topics are talked about in advance, so many of the burdens can be removed so you can focus on family and friends during these difficult times. So for those of you, I notice a lot of you have had the conversation, and I think that you learn that you need to have the conversation, to plan accordingly. And when you've had conversations with family in the past, what worked well and maybe what hasn't worked well, and kind of bridge on that, make sure you're in a comfortable setting, and pick a time and a place where it minimizes risks of distractions and interruptions, and have our intentions be clear. And sometimes I'm not very direct and I go in circles myself with my own family, but it's kind of like, I want to make sure that you're remembered the way that you would like. Let's talk about the preferences that'll make it easier for family. And it's important to love ones together and to remember your life. And get others involved. If you got siblings and you're planning for a parent or something, have them be a part of it if they'd like to be. Have those open discussions and dialogues. And, a lot of times people are waiting to be asked because they don't want to, as a parent, not wanting to burden our kids and bring up that uncomfortable. And sometimes it's just like, hey, we all are passing through and we all have the same end journey. Is there anything that you want to talk about? And sometimes it's like, oh, good. I didn't want to be upsetting to you, and I didn't want to be upsetting to you. So it's good. It does well. So when you think about a funeral, there's a lot of aspects. But when I was thinking today, when Cheryl said to come over and talk, there's really about 4 categories when you talk about planning a funeral that it puts it into. And I'll just kind of whip through them, and then we can expand on them. But it's really final disposition. It's not really a very attractive sound. But really, what do we want to do with our bodies after we die? Ultimately, it means, do you want to be buried in a casket in the ground, or do you want to be cremated? That's the final disposition piece. Then there's the details, or the personalization. And for those that you know, it's picking out, well, it's doing all the lovely paperwork, casket, urn, vaults, death certificates, obituaries, flowers, all those things that are on the handouts. There's so many cool ways to memorialize us now with photos, photo boards, slideshows, blogs that people have, and they do thummies. We do thumb things. You can do jewelry, and if people aren't comfortable having cremated remains, in a necklace, maybe there's a thumbie. And so there's a lot of neat things to make it, have our legacy. The other piece, which is what Cheryl's going to talk about, is the service itself, which is really, when you put all those details around it, that's kind of what you want to wrap your arms around. And that, as Christians, and that's kind of what it's all about. So when you get together with Cheryl or everybody here, you talk about scripture, music, musicians, eulogies, the lunch, how many people might be coming. What do you want to have? Are you going to have steak and lobster, a keg of beer, or what sounds good? But it really all weaves together to create this really great memorialization. The fourth piece that is the financial piece for all these items. And as a funeral director, that's the least favorite part of what I do, but I also know that it's a reality. So what we do is, when we kind of wrap it all together, for what people are talking about, then we come up with, here's how much it is for these type of things. With respect to like church, for example, all the honorariums or fees is another way of saying, for musicians, sound tech, custodial, lunch, all those things that come into play. So those are kind of the main buckets, I guess, that you'd call them, that you deal with. And so when a family calls on the phone, they may have a prearrangement, or it might be something sudden or unexpected, and they just pick up the phone and they call. And I know how hard that can be for families just to call, let alone rock into our door at times. But so for me, and I think most other funeral directors, I don't like to overwhelm people and start, asking a lot of questions. It's more, in the initial conversation I have, is just ask a couple pictures to kind of get the big picture set, kind of the who, what, or not the who, what, but the what, where, and whens. So ask a couple questions, and that usually leads to another conversation, and somehow we weave to get the answer to what are you thinking. Like, for example, one of the first questions I might say is, have you had the opportunity as a family to talk a little bit about what type of service you might want to have for your mom? I'll just pick our mom. And if they say, yeah, we know that mom wants to be cremated, depending on how that's answered is my next question. And then I'll say, okay, great. Are you planning on having her casket in church and having a review before cremation? Or are you thinking about having the cremation before and having a memorial at church? And depending which way that goes will be how I answer the next question, because I believe that when we die, we all have we're so personal in life, and I think we should be personal in our death experience. And we all have loving people that everything in life, they want to help us make decisions or offer things, but at the end of the day, we have to take it and make it our own. So one of our jobs, and I feel it's a big responsibility as funeral directors, is to educate families on their decisions and their options of what they can do. So for example, if someone says they want to be cremated, and maybe they aren't known, people have to decide. So in that first conversation, we kind of throw out those kind of big things to think about. Where might it be? Have you thought about what you're going to do? And maybe about when? And that's that's enough. And so for some people, they don't even want to talk about that. We'll just talk about it when we come in. But that way, it kind of gets the big picture started. And then when you come in, we can get all those details with the specific and each thing put together and go through it all. And then obviously meet with church and get the church piece figured out as well. I know when I talked to Valerie, she loves when families come here to the funeral home first, because then there's a lot of questions that are answered that she doesn't have to, oh, I don't know about that, I don't know about that. No, Valerie's, no. So good, okay, good, I'm glad you went there first. So so we can kind of work through that, and then when we get together, we can talk more specifics about the details. Do you guys want me to go into embalming and when that's needed and things like that as well? Because I'm happy to do that. I think that, so with the final disposition, whether you're going to be buried in a casket or cremated, you can have a visitation and review with cremation to follow. You can bury, the law says with cremation is considered final disposition. So I know the columbarium is an option for here. Some people go to their cabin up north, or you can be buried in a cemetery. So you kind of talk through what is important. Do you want to have a place to go? If you have a lake place, is it okay if down the road you sell the lake place and it's now somebody else's lake place? You know, so you kind of talk about all those things. If it's a cremation beforehand, you know, that's great. I think it's just more important who has had that opportunity. It's about saying goodbye. And I know I've used this one example before about this one young man who died. I think he was 42, and his wife called up, and he had gone down to his son, was a freshman at Iowa, and he went down to the Hawkeye game with their freshmen in high school. So here they were coming out of the Hawkeye game, and this man just, boom, right outside the football stadium. So his wife calls up and said, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. My husband is down in Iowa. And so, you know, we take over the logistic part, and it's like, did you ever have a conversation? You know, have you talked about what you might want to do? Well, no, you're only 42, so at that point we're still pretty immortal at 42, I think, maybe. I don't know, maybe not as much. But they said, yeah, he knew he wanted to be cremated. I say, well, that's a big part of the answer for a lot of people. But yet he didn't think that at 42 he would die right outside the Iowa Hawkeye football stadium with the freshmen in high school and a freshman in college. So we talked about that and who needed to see him before he was cremated. And, you know, it was important for his kids to be there and see him and friends to be there and family. So they chose to have a visitation and review and a mass, and then following the mass, he was cremated after mass. Now, if you take that same 42-year-old person and he had been dying of some time of long-term illness, for those of you who have lost people to an illness, you know, and it's a terminal disease, the minute that the person is diagnosed with that, I believe that's when the grieving process starts. And so you may have been having your visitation, or when someone goes on hospice, you're having your visitation. You've got friends coming to the house, and you're saying goodbye, you're sharing stories with the person, with family, and that can be your visitation time. And now, especially with hospice involved, and more people are dying at home. When I first got out of school, there was not many people dying at home. I mean, not like way back in the day when almost everybody died at home, but, and it's really amazing that we can be in our home and be in a comfortable environment and have our family be there, and then also have those angels called hospice come in and help us do things on a practical, or give us a little bit of break for what we need. So back to our same young man, that if he had been dying at home and his kids had been there, family's been there, and they'd been saying their goodbye, it maybe wouldn't be as important to them. They may have a different answer. That they may decide, you know, we're going to have cremation first and have his urn at church. So I believe that we might say today, well, if I die tomorrow, here's what I want. But when tomorrow is really tomorrow, you kind of have to talk about, it's different if you're 15, 35, 60, or 95 years old, and how we die determines those decisions from what we make. I think that is really a big impact on that. So. And so that's a big part. We sit down and we help write the obituary. We get all the death certificate information. We help do, I mean, that's what we're there for. We're there to be a resource, to do as much or as little as you need. And sometimes if families say, I don't think we really need you there, I try not to take it too personally, but, and sometimes we're not needed to be there. If someone has moved here from a long place away and they just came here to be by family and they're 103 years old and there's going to be just family, maybe they're going to have something at their house or at their church and something on a more intimate level where it just, we'd be in the way. It's just not necessary. We still talk to them about and educate people on all the options, but yet there's times when we should be there, and there's other times when people say, well, I don't think that you need to be there, but boy, this person is 60 years old and in the prime of working and family and everything, and it's just going to be from, I don't know, have you guys been to those funerals where there's just, the church is full? I think of Mick, Carol Bundle, I think of, so, there are times when we actually, even after all the details are wrapped around, where we like to be here. I always say if we do our job right, you don't even know we exist. We've gotten everything how you want it to be done, and we talk to the church or where it's going to be, and we just kind of work the plan and just kind of in the background. So that's kind of our deal on that. Visitations, a little bit about visitations. It seems like cremation now is about half. Half of us choose cremation after we die. A lot of us will have a visitation with reveal and cremation after. We have a lot of visitations the night before, even if there's not a casket there. I think visitations are good because they provide, well, I'll give you an example. My grandma, who was a pastor's wife, and she was 94 when she died, she didn't want anything the night before because she wanted everybody in that church. So it's going to be an hour before. I'm not giving the opportunity to come and just come and say hi and then not come into church. Everybody's coming to church. If they can't make it, they're lost. So that was my grandma. She was German and married a Norwegian man, so if he had an opinion, it probably wouldn't have even mattered. So, but I think a lot of times it's beneficial because a lot of times it's very overwhelming to have everything in one day. I mean, an hour ahead of time goes by in a blink. So it gives an opportunity to be with family more, visit people more. It also gives friends that are coming an opportunity to come the night before if they can't make it the same day. Or maybe they don't know the person who died as well, but they know you, and they want to come in and just say hi to you and give you a hug and go. And it's also more an informal environment where it could be a lot more personalization. You can have secular music. You can get up and do a memory sharing and say stories, not that they be too off-colored that you couldn't say them at church, but church is where when you close the casket, so to speak, and the service starts, that you take the focus off of our physical body and it becomes about our spiritual body. So it's a lot more informal, Irish wake, maybe-ish, so to be. So, yeah, that's kind of it. I think, I know you guys are doing readings. The last one that I just read a book, and because my memory isn't the best, I've forgotten most of it already, so I have to go back and reread it. But there's a young guy, Thomas Lynch is a great writer. Writes what's called The Undertaking. And then there's a young gentleman, his name is Jacob Wilder. Have you guys heard that one, Confessions of a Funeral Director? He's 36, so when I first saw that he was 36, I'm thinking, well, he's been out of school like 5 minutes. What does he have that he can share with people? Well, I read it and I loved it, and I've asked people who aren't in the profession what they thought about it. It's a very quick read, and it's his perspective on him, how he struggled with being, a funeral director, and it inspires and deepens and move readers to kind of to embrace death and mortality, and to make it a good death narrative. So I would encourage that. I think that's been a good read as well. So anyway, I think
So I'm going to shift. I'm going to talk, and then when I'm done, Carrie and I will take your questions. Is that fair? You good? Okay. Thank you, Carrie. Sure. What I'm going to do is essentially cover 3 things, and you do need your binders. So if you have them with you, you can open them up. Inside the front cover, there's a little packet, and there is a brochure for CaringBridge. I just want to ask, who knows what CaringBridge is and how it works? Okay, for those of you who are unfamiliar with CaringBridge, let me just orient you a little bit. When someone has been diagnosed with an illness, or they've had a catastrophic injury and they wind up hospitalized for a long term, one of the problems that families often face is disseminating information, and it's challenging to get the correct information out to all of the people who care. CaringBridge is a website, it's free, and what you do is you log in, you create the site, usually there's a picture of the person, there's a place that tells their brief story, you know, a diagnosis or the nature of the injury, and then on a regular basis, a member of the family or a very close family friend writes and gives sort of an update, a journal entry on what's going on. And then the real blessing piece is it gives all of the family and friends a place to send comments and letters and prayers. People tell me all the time that they use the CaringBridge site and they just read the responses to the person who is in the hospital bed, recovering or dying, and that they find it to be a great comfort. So hang on to this, and if you know someone who has need of something like that to communicate, please make sure that they're aware of it as well. If you will turn now to the section that says SPDLC resources, so it's the third section. There are a few pieces of information in there that I want to go over with, 3 forms in particular. The very first one says my preferences for my funeral or memorial service. This, in essence, becomes like your pre-planning. This is the way you can make some decisions about your own service in anticipation of your end of life, and make those decisions and notes on here so that your family doesn't have to face those decisions on their own. Remember when we started at our very first session, I held up, which was in essence this sheet of paper, and it had the person's name on one side, on the back. Remember what it said? Let the children decide. So this is your gift to your loved ones. You're going to make some decisions so that they're not left guessing and wondering what they should do. Sometimes people don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but once again, as we have reiterated time and time again, simply having the conversation makes it so much easier for the people on the other side as they wrestle with what should we do and what would he or she have wanted. You can complete this by yourself, and then what you do is keep a copy for yourself, and then you can bring a copy to church, and we keep them on file here. We'll look at another document in a minute, but I'll just give you a heads up. In that document, it says multiple times in multiple places, please ask the church if there's one of these on file for your loved one, because then we'll pull that out and we'll work through that together and see what decisions were made at that time and what their desires were. As I said a couple weeks ago, something like 136 decisions are required within the first 36 hours after a death. That's a lot of decisions to make. Here is a word to you about decision making. On the one hand, you will be making decisions based on your preferences. This is what I want, and this is what I don't want. In as far as you have clarity about those kinds of things, I want to be cremated. I don't want a visitation. You can put that down on paper. Let me also point out, however, that the funeral service is not for you anymore, because you are now dead. And so your people are gathered, and they come with their own needs and their own agenda, especially those who are closest to you. So let me encourage you to continue to think about the fact that the people you leave behind have some needs, and you can help make those things happen for them in a meaningful way. For example, a woman was diagnosed with cancer. She was 70, and she made it very clear throughout her illness that she did not want anything. Lifelong Lutheran, faithful worshiper. I do not want a visitation. I do not want a worship service. I do not want anything at the graveside. So her husband abided by her word. Well, you can imagine what happened to the intimacy of her family, and then the next layer of friends, they felt as though they'd had no closure. There was nothing to say goodbye, and especially for someone who was so faithful, the people in her church really wrestled with, how do we do this now? So again, I just encourage you to think very clearly about the fact that on the one hand, it's about the things that are important to you. On the other hand, it's also important about the people that you end up leaving behind. Again, if you take a look at the paper, we'll just kind of walk through that. There's a place for your contact information, though I can't imagine why we would need that at that moment. So let us know who you are. And then there's a place to indicate the funeral home, so you can make prearrangements with funeral homes. We have only listed 2 here, and then there's a place for other. There are way more than 2 funeral homes. But I will tell you, David Lee and Gertie Delmore know us best here at St. Philip the Deacon, and so we rarely have to have very much of a conversation because they know, well, not only do they know St. Philip the Deacon, but they know each one of the 4 pastors so well that they're able to anticipate how we do things, why we do things the way we do. So you can identify somebody else if you choose to. Those are just 2 that happen to know us very, very well. I should also say a word about this. Do you know that any funeral home can do a cremation? Are you all on board with that? Every now and then people will say to me, oh, I thought since I wanted to be cremated, I had to go to the Cremation Society. Let me be really clear about this. When you go to a place like the Cremation Society, what isn't a part of what they provide as a service is all of the sort of full service stuff that comes with a funeral home. So like Carrie said, when they're doing their job really well, you don't even know they're here, and yet behind the scenes, everything is running like clockwork. There isn't a single mix-up, everybody is well cared for, and everyone's needs are accommodated. So if you choose to go with someplace like the Cremation Society, you will want to ask some really important questions. Like if it's a young person and you expect it to be a large funeral, will someone from the Cremation Society come and stay at the venue? So let's say it's here at St. Philip the Deacon. Will they be there before the service starts, through the service, after the service starts? Will they help with ushering? Will they help move things around the building? Those are important questions to ask. When you go to a funeral home, those questions come up quite naturally in the course of the conversation, but by experience, they do not come up so clearly with a place like the Cremation Society. There's a place here to indicate if you want a visitation. Again, with regard to visitation, different circumstances will lead to different decisions on that. As Carrie suggested, sometimes what will happen is the family has journeyed for such a long time with someone who has been ill. So there's been grieving and a natural sort of visitation, and so the big gathering doesn't feel the same way, or in the case of her mother, which I love, no, I want them all at church. I don't want to give them an excuse not to show up at the church. But I would also remind you that the visitation is as much, if not more, about the surviving family members. It's an opportunity for you to experience the love and care of people who all they want to do, and you know this from your own experience, all you want to do is support somebody when they're walking through a dark time like grief. And the visitation is sort of the first opportunity they have to come and to just be present. They just show up for you. One of my favorite memories from here is when a dear, sweet member died, and her husband at age 90 plus stood at those fellowship hall doors and refused to sit down and eat because he didn't want to miss the opportunity to thank each and every worshiper for coming and being present. And in return, what he received was all of this like incredible love and support. So when you think about visitation, you will be the one making the arrangement for somebody else. Anticipate that that may be very healing and comforting for you. The decision about a casket or a cremation, that is an important family conversation. If you have strong opinions about a desire there, it's important to say those out loud to your family members so that the children and or your spouse or whoever is making the arrangements for you don't have to argue over it. So if you've got an opinion, make sure you indicate that there. With regard to music, we have a policy and a practice which I can tell you right now because you are not in the midst of grief. We do not allow anything but, we only allow sacred music to be played in this space. So you can't have Somewhere Over the Rainbow as part of the prelude. When a family comes and they say, but that song meant so much, and they tell us the long story about it, first of all, I'll tell you that is not a teachable moment. And so we always wrestle with hurt feelings. People are grieving, they're emotional, but we are very, very strict about that. We do not allow anything but sacred music in this space. That does not mean that we won't try to accommodate you. So I did a service for a young woman who she was 48, 49 when she died, and her husband wanted a very specific secular piece of music to be sung. And what we ended up doing is we recessed with the casket and we gathered in the narthex, and actually this turned out to be a very beautiful, intimate moment. And it was a small funeral. We encircled the casket and a soloist sang the piece. We were outside of the worship center. Worship was already concluded. The benediction had been spoken, and it fit and it worked, and I think they were satisfied at the end of the day. That doesn't mean we haven't disappointed people who really want it to happen here, but I'll just tell you that up front. You can select scripture. I always tell families when I meet with them to plan a service, if they haven't found a document like this with some advanced notes from the person, I say, do you have any idea what they would have liked, or do you have any idea what you would have liked? And most of the time people go, no, we don't really. And what I say, and it always works every single time, go to their bedside table, their nightstand, open up the drawer, find their Bible, find their devotional book, and I bet you will find a page dog-eared, bookmarked, something scribbled in the margin, and that often becomes the piece then that is the center for the rest of the service. Again, if you have something that's important to you that you say to yourself, I really would like this to be read, make a note. Let somebody know, or scribble a note in your in the margin. My grandmother, my dad's mom, when she died, she was a very stubborn, feisty, like 5-foot tall woman, and when she died, she had a suitcase packed, and she had everything in the suitcase, dictating literally every single moment, and we laughed about it, and at the same time, we were all so grateful that we didn't have to make any of those decisions. She had made them for herself. On this form, you can also indicate if you want memorial gifts to be designated to any particular place. That will also be a conversation that happens when you're at the funeral home. There's some other helpful information at the bottom. Do you have a will? Where is it kept? Sometimes family members don't know that about each other, and so if we have this on file here, we can help with that. And then we ask you to sign and date it. You don't need it notarized. You don't need a witness. This is just letting us know what your wishes are. And when you're done, then, as I said, make a copy for yourself and leave a copy here at church. You can update this at any time. It can become null and void when you say, and it can become a tool at the time of planning the service. And if your family finds themselves going, this just doesn't feel right, we can make accommodations, obviously. Questions on sort of that pre-piece? You good? Okay. If you turn the page, then we have a little booklet. This is the Funeral or Memorial Service Planner, and when there is a death, one of the pastors will come, and we usually bring this booklet with us. When we know that death is imminent, we can come with it earlier, and if death isn't imminent but the prognosis is not good, we can also make it available to you then. This becomes a place to hold information. Again, so many decisions are made within those very first hours, and a lot of people are helping. There's people in and out of the house, and there's phone calls and emails flying around. It's nice to have one document where all of the phone numbers are. It's sort of the go-to, and you can say, go find the booklet. It says on the booklet that we called so-and-so, or go find the booklet and the phone number will be in there. A couple of notes about what's in here. You can indicate who the funeral home is and put the contact information there. If there are some people that it's really important that they get notified, or you have already notified them, you can document that here so people know sort of where you are. There's some contact information on the second page on the right-hand side there. People here at church that you can contact. Usually the way it works at church is at the time of death, be it at home or in a nursing home or in the hospital, your first call will be to the funeral home, and often your first visit will be with the people at the funeral home, and then they will call us, and often we will have a conversation at that time on the phone about possible date/time based on where you and your family are in terms of thinking about how soon can this happen and who can get here from wherever. And then after we have that conversation, the pastor sort of coordinates everything else. So the pastor will be in touch with the musicians, the pastor will be in touch with Cindy Carlson in terms of planning the luncheon. That doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with those people. That just means that's normally how it takes place, but you can step outside that box if you need to or prefer to. There's a couple of notes in here about organ donation and autopsy. There's a page all about the death certificate with some sort of basic information. This, of course, is very helpful before you go to the funeral home. So again, if you find yourself with some time between the death and your funeral home visit, that's information that you'll be happy to fill in. Making the decision about burial or cremation is listed in there, and again, you can check those boxes so that people who are helping you plan and coordinate things in those days right immediately after the loss, they have a place to look for that. There's a little helpful piece about how to write an obituary, and again, the funeral home is very, very helpful in assisting you with that. And there's also information about a grave marker, assuming that you're being buried in a cemetery and there'll be a marker there. When it comes to planning the service, we're going to look at another document in a minute, and I'll say a few words about how we think about and do that. But for your help right here, there's some hymns listed as possible suggestions, and some scripture also listed as possible suggestions. But what I really want to communicate to you is that almost any scripture and almost any hymn can be appropriate. We can make it appropriate in the context of worship. So don't feel limited by this. There may be something that means something to you, and that's fine. We can work with that. You will see on the next page there's the question about viewing the body. Carrie talked a little bit about this. I believe that we live in a culture that while we have made huge strides in how we treat the body, i.e. entering and exiting through the front door with dignity, we also, I think, have for a very long time had a hard time looking at a body. And I think there's something to be said for the viewing of the dead body of your beloved. I think there's a finality to it. I think there's a reality to it. I should say this, I also don't believe that we should keep children away from that. I think children respond quite spontaneously and honestly and beautifully to the whole process. I think they only find it as scary as you treat it, and I think generally they find it to be healthy to be able to have seen grandma or seen great-grandpa and ask their appropriate questions. So give some consideration to viewing the body, and again, cremation doesn't mean that there's no viewing of the body. All depends on timing and the order in which you let things unfold. Service details are listed here. Again, I'm going to go over those in a moment. Here at St. Philip, generally the way it works, there are always exceptions. If somebody has been ill for a while, one of the pastors will visit them, and we keep sort of one pastor to the person. So you don't have all four of us running in and out. And then generally it's that pastor who would do the service, so it's generally somebody with whom you've had a relationship. You should also feel very comfortable saying, we would like Pastor so-and-so. None of us are ever offended by that. We completely understand. So please do not ever feel like you're going to hurt our feelings. We will not have hurt feelings at all. And then right next to it, you'll see there's a place that invites you to consider if you would like a word from the family, tribute/eulogy. What we try really hard to communicate to you and to the people who are going to be making that presentation during the service is that when you make a commitment to do that, we ask that it be short, so no more than 2 or 3 minutes, and we also ask that it be no more than 2 or 3 people doing that. We can't control it. We would never get up and interrupt somebody and ask them to take a seat, but some people have a lot to say. And you need to think about that if that's what you like. Some people have chosen to use Fellowship Hall and have an open mic. I will tell you my personal opinion about that, and that this should not sway how you feel about it, but I'll tell you from my own experience. When there is an open mic, 2 things happen. 1, everybody in that room becomes a captive audience, and I don't think that's fair to the guests. And secondly, as people become less interested in what people are saying, chatter starts to happen, and that always feels disrespectful to me. So I never find that to work very well. Sometimes it happens at a visitation at the funeral home. It works way better there. Somehow people are seated, they're ready, they know what this is going to be about. It's a prayer service, and then people are invited to speak. So you can think about that, and again, have a conversation with the pastor as you think about what that might look like. Place for pallbearers, place for memorial table, important papers. So that's all what's in here. Questions about what this is, how that works? Bruce.
At the memorial service, the presiding minister, does it have to be a staff member from St. Philip the Deacon?
So this is not a St. Philip the Deacon rule. His question was, at the service, does it have to be, for the presiding minister, do they have to be a current St. Philip the Deacon staff person? The answer to that question is, it is a pastoral courtesy that a pastor who is serving the congregation does the service. If there's a family friend, you have a relationship with a clergy person, we welcome them to come in and play a role, but that conversation happens between the 2 pastors in terms of deciding what do you want to do and how are we going to do this. And as pastors, we know better than to show up in a former congregation and say, here I am to do Joe's burial. We had such a rich relationship, because that undermines the work of the pastor who is there. Does that make sense? And does that help you, Bruce, in terms of what you're thinking about? Okay. All right, any other?
Is this available electronically?
Yes, this is online, so you can pull it off there as well. He wanted to know if it was available electronically. Okay, this last piece of paper that's in there, and I know some of you have to scoot for choir. Again, I never want Linda Armstrong on my bad side, so if you have to go, please go. And for the rest of you, we'll just kind of wind up here with this last couple of things. This one that says funeral or memorial service, it's the last piece in that section. This is nothing that you would ever fill out. This is here as an FYI. This is what the pastors use when you come, and this is where we collect the information. Mostly what I want you to see are the kinds of questions we're going to ask you. Do you want a visitation? What time is it going to be? Where is it going to be? Are you going to have photo boards? And if so, how many of them are you bringing? And then we can be ready for you. The hardest question we ask, anybody have any ideas? How many people do you think there will be? Here's how to answer that question, at least how I tell people to answer that question. If you can figure out how many people are on their Christmas card mailing list, you have a really good start. So you think about how large is that Christmas card mailing list, and then by extension, you can sort of go, okay, now we know about how many people will come. The other way, of course, to do it is to think about their connections, their relationships in professional organizations, in neighborhood and community organizations, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes age matters and sometimes age doesn't. On the day of the blizzard in April, we did a service for a man who was 88 years old. And when we gathered, I said, just beware that when we process in, we might be processing into an empty worship center because it's just going to be us. He was 88 and the family was here. And wouldn't you know it, all the people with walkers and canes and wheelchairs showed up for him in the midst of the blizzard. So people come because it's just that important. I think people of a particular generation especially understand that. We'll also ask about if you want to have a luncheon. We've never done steak and lobster, though I kind of like that idea, so let it be known. And Cindy Carlson is happy to sit and meet with you and have a conversation about that so that you can ask questions and find out how that works. What we do is we just give a bill either to you at your request or to the funeral director, which is most often the way it happens, and then it gets racked up into all of the final fees, and we only charge you for the money that's spent. And then anything that's left over, we package for you to take home. 2 worship details, and then we'll look at the back side of this. One is we have a funeral pall. The funeral pall is like the baptismal garment that goes over the casket. We are in the process of getting a smaller funeral pall to go over an urn. So those are available. I happen to think it is the last, most beautiful act of a family to open the funeral pall and to place it on either the casket or the urn. But we'll ask if you would like to do that, and if you would like, I mean, you can have it without having to touch it too, but if you're working with me, I will talk you into opening it up, because I think it's just that tender and beautiful. So that might be a good reason to call somebody else. We'll ask you about Life Tribute speakers, who they are, how many they are, and we will also ask you about the Sacrament of Holy Communion. Would you like to share the sacrament or not? That's up to you. You know that our practice at St. Philip the Deacon is that the table is open, and so we welcome everyone. Families are often nervous about guests who do not commune, and will they feel comfortable? And we always say, that's their decision. They get to decide. We welcome them with open arms, and they can or they cannot. And that's up to you. And I would say 50% of the time there's communion, 50% of the time there's not. So not a right or a wrong answer there. Okay? On the reverse side is 2 orders of worship. When you have service with Holy Communion, I would say it's about 40, 45 minutes. When you have service without communion, it can be about 30 minutes, depending on your Life Tribute speakers who might extend that. So it's important to sort of give some consideration to that. You can also do, as Carrie suggested, all of these things in a variety of orders. I have done more of this recently, and it surprises me every time, where the burial or the interment takes place before the worship service. And what families tell me about that is that that's usually the most emotional part, is when they have to walk away from the remains, their final goodbye, and then they find the service to be almost enjoyable. They're able to engage on it in a different way. But I would say more often it's the other reverse. We gather for the service, and then there's something on the other side of that. Finally, and then we'll do a couple Q&As. In the section right behind that on grief and loss, I want you to know that we have all kinds of rich resources for people to support them on the other side of a loss. So there's this brochure, Scripture Passages for Times of Grieving, and in the back of it there's a nice long list of books for adults and for children and for all different kinds of loss. So please keep that around and available for yourself. I also want you to know that the Grief Coalition, there's a brochure about that. You've seen it on the resource table. But we invite people to attend. You can drop in at any time. They meet pretty much year-round except on holidays. We also have a support group called the Sanctuary of Survivors, SOS, and that's for survivors of suicide, family members who have survived the suicide of a loved one. And beyond that, we have in the Nook an entire shelf of grief resources that are available to you. Many are there in multiple copies so that you can just help yourself. Take what you need, make use of it, share it with somebody who needs it. And then we gave you the afterwards little booklet a couple weeks ago, Helping Yourself Heal. Simple, straightforward, good stuff. Okay. Are you okay? All right. So I had one question here, and then you all should feel free to ask a couple of questions of both Carrie and me. Somebody wrote, how do children and spouses deal with loss after their father has passed? Here's my simple answer, differently. The loss of a parent, the loss of a spouse is vastly different. The mourning, the grieving is different, and it's important to sort of acknowledge that and to know that about each other so that you're not measuring yourself against the other person or wondering why they're not reacting the way you're feeling and reacting. There is a beautiful book in the other room, the Nook, that talks about the difference between a child's grief and a spouse's grief, and that might be helpful for whoever wrote that question. Okay. Questions? Anybody have anything? Roger.
Could you address the prepaid funeral expenses or funeral insurance?
Yes. So he wants to know about prepaid funeral expenses, funeral insurance. I think that's a Carrie question.
So just real briefly, I think yes, yes, and yes. We can do that, and a lot of times it used to be that people would just prepay their funerals when they were more of in a spend down situation, meaning there might be a parent or a spouse in a nursing home, and as we all know, at skilled nursing centers can be up to $10,000 a month, and our resources can be depleted pretty quickly. So now when you go to a nursing home, they'll ask you, is there a funeral home that you prefer to go to, and have you gone and prepaid your funeral? And that's kind of what it generally started with. And yes, in the state of Minnesota, any dollar, so if you were to come in, we'd have you, okay, if something happened tomorrow, what are you thinking for a service? And we'd itemize out everything within that down to church, obituaries, all the details, the services, and come up with a number. Obviously, we don't know exactly how much an obituary is till it publishes, but we get a good estimate. And then if you're comfortable with that number, and if it's a single pay, meaning you are in a spend down, and it comes to whether it's $5,000 or $10,000, it cannot go to a funeral home. The state of Minnesota is amazing. It has to go into a secured financial institution. The person is the purchaser and the beneficiary and of that policy. So that way, if the funeral home goes, see you later, bye, it's portable. You can choose to go to any funeral home as you want. Say you here and you end up, you don't like these winters, we go to Florida, it's portable to there. So works out well. And people do it even if they're not in a spend down situation as well. And the purpose isn't like the stock market to make a lot of money, it's to know the funds are set aside, and the hope is that it all keeps up with inflation if you kind of stick in with the parameters what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Being a donor, I die at home, and I'm taken to the University of Minnesota, and so that the parts of my body are donated. Then do they do the cremation, or does the funeral home come in after they're through with the parts of my body that I have donated?
So there's a couple different ways for donation. There's the full, are you speaking of the full body donation, where you're donating your whole body to the University of Minnesota to the bequest? Okay. So the University of Minnesota, we have an amazing teaching facility here where you can donate your whole body to the University of Minnesota, and you can go on their website and you can learn all about it, and it talks about what you can do. You may have a traditional funeral, the word tradition is, but you may have an open casket reviewal and then donate your body to the University of Minnesota. You may be, after that, or you may have them come. Let me back up. The University of Minnesota can come right to your house. You do need to sign up ahead of time, because I can't just decide that, oh yeah, and my husband Ed, he wanted to donate his body to the University of Minnesota. It's amazing. They call for you, they do the death certificate, and there's no charge involved whatsoever. They look at that as a gift that you are doing for them. Then you can, very many times, we as a funeral home will do whatever the family would need either after that if we found out they've donated, or now that you can have a service before you donate your body to the University of Minnesota.
So Carrie, when Does the University of Minnesota do cremation? And then
Yes,
they'll-
they will
and
do the cremation there.
Will they also allow you to do the cremation, or do they always do the cremation?
They always do the cremation, and they say that you'll have your, because what you're doing is you're allowing the medical school, the dental school, the mortuary science school, it's teaching. Our bodies are amazing, that gift that God gave us, to do that. So the cremation is there. Typically, you'll have, I believe they say you'll have done with all the research and the teaching, and within a year, then they'll usually call you, I believe, and tell you when the urn will be coming to you, so it just does, our remains don't just show up. So,
Any more? Oh my goodness, lots of them. So we're going to take 5 more, all the people that just put their hands up, and we'll be efficient with them. And then Carrie and I will stick around up here, and if you have questions that you want to ask individually, please holler. All right, who over here? Paula.
If we're like on a license, how does that?
yeah, so, right, so a donor,
She's a donor.
state of Minnesota, I believe in nursing, 1985, even if you are not a donor on your card and you're in a hospital, they will ask you as a family if you'd like to donate. There's different levels of donations. If I'm in a car accident and I'm on life support and I have no brain activity, they will ask, because the blood is still pumping through my organs, then you can donate your heart and all those other amazing things. After, if our body has not our systems are shut down and we've already died, then there's different donations they can do, especially if you're through LifeSource and others, where you can donate skin, long bone, eyes. That's Minnesota Eye Bank. Most of them are used for corneal research. So yes, there are options, but depending how we die and the timeline from that will preclude you, from what you are able to donate. So.
Somebody over here? Yep, Elaine. Yes. Her question was about pallbearers. Is there ever a situation where they're not used? And was there more?
Well, we come from a very small family, and there isn't always a lot of
Yep.
people available.
Yep. When there are not enough people available, we provide them, and then you don't have to name them. There are also honorary pallbearers, people who are named but can't carry out that responsibility. Carrie, would you say more to that in response?
Yeah, I think with pallbearers, it's more important who it is and how many. Traditionally it's 6. So if there are a lot of people to choose from, you can choose different facets of your life, whether it be neighbors, coworkers, friends. More and more, it's family, whether it be siblings or kids. It's just kind of how are you going to be feeling when we leave church. It's very meaningful to have families. We had one service where there was like 12 grandkids, and it looked like a little rugby scrum, but it was beautiful. We were leaving church, and we all sat there. They sat amongst themselves and their families, but here everyone just surrounded, and out we went, and it was beautiful. But if there's not, families are smaller, we escort the casket out the funeral home, and we're all on wheels, and we can lift in ourselves, and definitely there's help, and people are always happy to help. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, there was one more over in this neighborhood. Nope, Barry. Oh, Barry and then Bill.
I guess we don't have a unique situation, but we've only been in town about 5 years, so we've had some discussions. Do we have a service here? Do we have a service from where we came? And we already have our grave sites in St. Louis, Missouri, in a family plot of my wife's, with parents and grandparents and then us. So have you experienced with that kind of
No,
duality?
never.
Or any
No,
mixing?
no. This was his question. They've been here about 5 years. They have a family burial plot someplace else, and how do we make that all work? Barry, we've done it all. Seriously, we have done it all, and we really defer to the family. So sometimes we've done a service here, and then the pastor has gone to the graveside with the family. Sometimes we minister to the family up until the point of death, and then the pastor of the congregation near the burial plot takes over and does the service there, and sometimes there are 2 services. So you've got all kinds of options, and you can make that be meaningful however it feels for your family. Does that help?
Well, For example, I would say I want to be cremated primarily because of the simplicity of transferring remains.
Right, right.
My wife, of course, doesn't want to be cremated.
Yep.
So that would be different.
Yep. No problem. Seriously, we can handle all those kinds of things. Yep. And we've also faced a difficulty or two.
As much as we've been welcomed here and have made some very, very good friends, we have a lifetime of friends in
Right.
St. Louis.
Yep. And that's too far for them to all travel here. Though I will tell you, I did a service not too long ago. The woman had literally in her, 68 years, only 2 congregations, St. Philip the Deacon and her former congregation where she was born, baptized, confirmed, married, and her children were baptized. The service was here, and we live streamed it to the church, and they showed it in their worship center, and there was a whole second congregation worshiping with us. So in this day and age, we can do all kinds of things. Yeah, yeah. Bill?
Just a question about cremation. A lot of people talk about having their ashes spread here or there. What are the rules governing where you spread your ashes?
Yeah, the rules governing where you spread your ashes, I think they are dependent on, by state.
Well, state law, and there's also church.
You cannot scatter your ashes here. I will
Okay.
tell you that right now. We will have a columbarium. They can go there.
Not even at night, in the middle of the night when no one's here. No, the state of Minnesota considers cremation final disposition. So depending on what you're comfortable with, you can have them buried in a cemetery. You can have them buried in your neighbor's yard next door if you get their permission. I think it's what you're comfortable with. Sometimes people have different places where some of the cremations are going. I know the Catholic Church, for example, likes our cremated remains to all be in one place, buried in the cemetery and buried in blessed grounds. But that's more, so depending on faith too, guides that as well. But legally, cremation is the same as burying a casket in the ground. You can, take them on a plane and go somewhere. There's certain guidelines, but yeah, definitely.
We did a little research with my mother-in-law who wants to be cremated but didn't know where she wanted her ashes, so the family was online with her suggesting options that are real. Like you can have your ashes flown to the moon and let go in outer space. Bill, you were going to ask another question.
I'm talking about literally spreading
All of the ashes.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can do it over the water.
We have so many lakes here. So years ago, with Lake Minnetonka and all the 10,000 lakes we have, I actually called up the DNR to say, what happens if we're out doing this and you get busted, or what's going to happen to you? And he said, I don't mean any disrespect, but the worst thing that could ever happen to you is if a conservation officer comes up, is they could give you a ticket for littering, is what they would say. Now, in 35 years, I've never heard anybody doing that. I think that you can go, they're not healthy for the lakes. I don't think they hurt the lakes. It's all our bones. After we're cremated, all that's left is our bones that go through, and they're all uniform size. So if it's a big body of water, a few people's cremated remains are not going to impact the, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Bruce?
We had a family chartered in Minnehaha, Lake Minnetonka. And the ashes of that gentleman are out spread through the lake.
Yep.
I love that.
Yep.
My dad used to call what he did the burial at sea, which was Lake Minnetonka Sea in the winter, and he and our Pastor Bodie from our other church were good friends, so they go out, they went ice fishing. The guy wanted to be scattered in the middle of the winter, so they went out ice fishing and said a prayer and in the winter, so
Thank
one
you.
version.
Okay, if you have other questions, I'm going to have you ask afterwards, if that's okay. Let me do, Susan, I'm going to do a quick announcement, my last announcements, and then Susan's going to wrap it up and answer a couple of questions and bring us to conclusion. Next week is our workshop night. You got a piece of paper that looks like this on your way in. This is all who is going to be here next week, so there's like 15 different tables. All of these people are here and ready to answer your individual questions. 3 of them will have an opportunity to say a few words. Linda Armstrong will speak a few words to all of us together in the worship center next week about music, and then she will have appointments available for, or she'll allow you to just tell her you want to make an appointment with her to have further conversation. She has choir, so she won't be able to visit too much, but she'll have a little bit of time. Cindy Carlson will also say some words to the full community based on how we do luncheons and answer some very general questions. And then Jim Lamb, who is an estate attorney with Great Plant Moody from downtown, he will be with us. He's going to talk just very briefly about our social media presence and what we do with our digital footprint after we die. So this is sort of brand new, groundbreaking, like, oh my goodness, what do you do with stuff like that? He will say a few words about that, but then he will be available at a table to talk with you about wills and estate planning. Somebody asked a question about a will. He is your go-to guy. I'm forwarding that question to him. Let me just ask, how many of you are planning on being here next week to visit somebody? Okay, excellent. We'll start in here. We'll introduce everybody, and then we'll go across the hall. Sound good? All right, with that, Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can wind us up.
Okay, we had a couple of cards left from last week, and I think they've been answered, but I will read them also. One was about the clarification about the ambulance service. If you are DNR, will they do CPR, even though you do not want CPR? If you call the ambulance service, as I understand, unless you have a post, which is by a doctor, an order by a doctor that only a doctor can write, that you have usually on the refrigerator, sometimes they'll have it in the ice box, they will do CPR if they are called. And I know of situations where people the neighbors have called even though the person is DNR. Anybody else have any other information about that? But it depends on the situation too in which you are in. And the other question, and I think Dr. Strood answered this, is what kind of physician to use at the end of life with the lack of formal, any kind of geriatric training, or what kind should you use, what medical discipline is the best to recognize and properly treat the disease in conditions of the aging. And I think he said this to you, is it's whoever you're comfortable with and have the best relationship with. There are palliative care doctors that are amazing at the end of life, and they're becoming more and more of those. There are geriatric doctors also, and they would be more familiar with some of that. But a lot of the specialists, cardiologists, pulmonologists, they deal with people that are aging all the time. That's probably most of their population. So it's who you have a relationship with. It could be your family practice doctor. And those are all good questions. So if you have any more questions, please write them out there. I don't know if we'll have time to answer them. And the only other thing was just there's resources in the book. If you've looked at here, there's books written in here. There's an essential document locator checklist. Look at those. There's a lot more information out there, and some of them are out there on the table. There is one from Annette from last week that she has in here, different books and things like that. So thank you all for coming. Remember, if you're doing advanced care planning next week, to do a little bit of homework ahead of time, please. And
if you are going to use the notary, you have to have a picture ID with you.
yes, did you hear that? If you're going to use the notary, Kathy Hagedorn is here as the notary and asks that you have a picture ID, even though we know probably who most of you are. She's by the book. Thank you for coming, and if you have any more questions, Carrie and Cheryl are down here. I am around also, and enjoy the beautiful weather. I can't believe we started out with snow piles, and now there's probably none. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you.